In honor of reaching part 500, here are some of the most morbid facts I've ever posted. In 1993, Canadian lawyer Gary Hoy claimed to a group of students that the windows in his building were unbreakable. To prove this, he threw himself at the window at full force. While the glass didn't break, the frame popped out and Gary fell 24 stories to his death. In cases of CP, someone has to actually watch the video from beginning to end so that they can testify about it in court. After his mother died in 2013, Arizona man Jim Stauffer donated her body for scientific research. He later found out that her corpse was sold to the US military for $6,000 and blown up at a bomb testing site. After being diagnosed with polio at age 3, Diane Odell spent nearly 60 years in a 750-pound iron lung. She only died when a power outage shut down the machine that had been keeping her alive for decades. These were just some of the wedding rings that were removed from victims of Buchenwald concentration camp during the Holocaust. In Houston, Texas, a 19-year-old man named Rashad died while attempting to play Russian roulette in front of his friends. But he apparently didn't know how the game worked since he tried using a semi-automatic pistol instead of a revolver. In 1985, a 13-year-old Colombian girl named Omaira Sanchez was trapped up to her waist in volcanic mud flow. Knowing there was no way to free her, volunteers and rescuers did their best to comfort her. She died after 60 hours, and her photo became iconic. A grieving mother from Florida added a sandbox to the gravesite of her baby boy so that his big brother could play with him. In order to keep Genghis Khan's burial a secret, all 2,000 people who attended his funeral were executed. The executioners were then killed by members of his escort, who eventually took their own lives once they reached their destination. 800 years later, Genghis Khan's burial site still remains undiscovered to this day. The most morbid facts of all time, Part 2. The Grinch as a kid was played by an 18-year-old actor with dwarfism. Sadly, he died of heart failure just 2 years after the movie released. When a photojournalist took this picture of a little girl in Syria, she raised her arms in surrender because she thought the camera was a gun. In 2009, Moscow native Julia Popova was stabbed in the neck by a mugger, but she was in so much shock that she walked all the way home without even realizing that the knife was embedded in her neck, just millimeters from her spinal cord. She spent more than an hour with the blade inside of her before finally going to the hospital. In 1987, Kenneth Parks drove 12 miles to his mother-in-law's house and stabbed her to death in the middle of the night. But he didn't receive any jail time because Kenneth's lawyer was able to prove that he was sleepwalking the entire time. In 2012, a woman from New York donated her kidney to save the life of her boss. Her boss later fired her when she took too long to recover from the operation. Mohammed Bajay was an Iranian serial killer who raped and killed at least 40 young boys throughout the early 2000s. But his crimes only gained national attention because of the way in which he was executed. He was stoned by a mob, lashed 100 times, stabbed by the brother of one of his victims, and then hanged. Ever since she was a little girl, Jewel Shuping always wanted to be blind. So in 2006, she poured drain cleaner into her eyes and fully blinded herself. She says she's now happier than ever after fulfilling her lifelong wish. A Massachusetts man named Kenny Waters was wrongfully imprisoned for 18 years for murder. He was finally freed in 2001 after his high school dropout sister went to law school to prove his innocence. Sadly, he died 6 months after his release in a freak accident. After a mass shooting, you would expect complete silence at the crime scene. But police say one of the eeriest things is all the phones that ring when family members are trying to find out if their loved ones are okay. The most morbid facts of all time, Part 3. JFK's little sister Rosemary suffered from mood swings throughout her childhood. Fearing that she would end up embarrassing the Kennedy name, her father arranged for her to receive one of the first lobotomies when she was 23, and the surgery was completely botched. Doctors asked her to sing God Bless America while they sliced away at her brain with a tool that looked like a butter knife, and they stopped the surgery when she became incoherent. It left Rosemary completely incapacitated and unable to walk or speak until her death in 2005. Born in 1661, King Charles II of Spain was the product of 200 years of inbreeding that intended to strengthen the family line. He was breastfed until the age of 4 and never fully learned how to walk. As an adult, he was completely illiterate and could barely chew or speak due to his deformed jaw and enlarged tongue. He was so ugly and disfigured that his own wife was terrified of him. His autopsy revealed some rather disturbing findings, stating that his heart was the size of a peppercorn, his lungs corroded, his intestines rotten and gangrenous. He had a single testicle black as coal, and his head was full of water. As part of a 1974 art performance, artist Marina Abramovich told visitors she wouldn't move for 6 hours no matter what they did to her. She placed 72 items on a table and invited people to use them on her however they pleased with no punishment. There were objects for pleasure including a rose, perfume, and wine, as well as objects for pain including scissors, a whip, and a loaded gun. Visitors were gentle to begin with, but gradually got more aggressive as they became comfortable. Within 3 hours, all of her clothes had been completely cut off, and some people even started slicing her skin. She was sexually assaulted various times and had rose thorns stuck in her abdomen. One person even held the gun to her head until someone else took it away. Once the performance was over 6 hours later, the crowd scampered like mice to avoid an actual confrontation. Afterwards, Abramovich said, "If you leave it up to the audience, they can kill you." The most morbid facts of all time, Part 4. 19-year-old Sam Ballard was a star rugby player in Australia until he was dared to eat a garden slug at a team party. The slug ended up infecting him with an awful condition called rat lungworm, which paralyzed him and eventually killed him 8 years later. In 1894, a priest in Germany saved a little boy from drowning. That little boy was Adolf Hitler. In 2013, a Clemson student ran an experiment to help turtles safely cross the road. So he placed a fake turtle in the road to observe driver behavior and accidentally discovered something very disturbing. He found that 6% of people deliberately went out of their way to hit the turtle. After Elvis died on the toilet at age 42, his doctor said the cause of death was an embarrassing case of chronic constipation. His stool was so backed up from drugs that he hadn't taken a dump in at least 4 months. In ancient Rome, men found guilty of grape sometimes had their testicles crushed between 2 stones. In 2011, Tokyo officials went to congratulate the oldest man in the city on his 111th birthday. But upon entering the man's home, they instead found his mummified remains sprawled across his bed. He'd been dead for 30 years, and his family was still collecting the pension money he was receiving. These are the graves of a Catholic woman and her Protestant husband, who were not allowed to be buried together in 1888. Until as recently as 1999, doctors believed that babies couldn't feel pain and performed surgeries on them without anesthesia. In the late 1980s, a woman went on a vacation getaway where singles could meet other singles. She quickly thought she met the man of her dreams and decided to sleep with him that night. But when she woke up in the hotel room the next morning, the man was gone and there was a small wooden coffin on the table next to her. Inside was a note that read, "You are now HIV positive. Welcome to the world of AIDS." The most morbid facts of all time, Part 5. 18-year-old John Thompson was home alone when he had both of his arms ripped off in a farming accident. But he still managed to get up and dial 911 with a pencil in his mouth. He miraculously survived and both of his arms were reattached. Co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, was denied after begging for whiskey on his deathbed and died 36 years sober. According to some ancient beliefs, your birthmarks show how you died in your past life. In 2010, a 17-year-old Chinese boy sold his kidney on the black market so that he could buy the new iPhone and iPad. 8 years later, the man's other kidney failed, and now he's bedridden for life. This massive pile of buffalo skulls shows how the population of American buffalo dropped from 30 million to 300 in just 50 years. Most were killed by the U.S. military to deprive Native Americans of their primary food source. This famous mummy found in the ash of Pompeii appeared to be satisfying himself during his final moments in 79 AD. During a 1998 soccer match in the Republic of Congo, a lightning bolt struck one of the goal pitches. It killed all 11 members of the home team who were all wearing metal spikes, but the other team was left completely unscathed since they'd all been wearing rubber cleats. This is a photo of 2 engineers embracing for one final hug while standing on top of a wind turbine engulfed in flames. One of the men jumped to escape the fire while the other was burned alive while attempting to reach the staircase. Here's a photo of a little African girl at a zoo in Belgium in 1958. Visitors would often throw bananas and peanuts to her as if she was an animal. A hitchhiking robot that relied on the kindness of strangers to travel the world made it safely across Canada, Germany, and the Netherlands. But just 2 weeks into its American tour, Hitchbot was found in Philadelphia with its arms and head ripped off.